Okay guys, we're moving into genetics and we are going to be looking at how genetic variations occur through offspring. So offspring would be the babies that two parents would have through inheritance. We're going to look at how those genes that are passed on from parents to their children are passed along and how they can vary or change as the offspring receive them. So if you have not yet set up your notes, if you haven't written your I can and set up your page, you should pause the video and do that. Make sure you're counting how many lines should be allowed for information. I have that set up on purpose. And when you're ready to go, you can unpause and come back to the video. So we do have some key vocabulary, some words we're going to be looking at over and over again. Genes is a big one. Obviously, it's the root word of genetics. And genes are sections of DNA that carry alleles. Now, alleles is another word. You can see another vocabulary. So sections of DNA that carry the alleles from the parents to offspring. And again, offspring means the babies. Okay? So genes carry alleles, but the question is, what are alleles? Well, alleles are simply traits. So that might be, blonde hair or brown eyes, or I'm really tall or really short, or just different traits or characteristics. So the genes carry the parents' traits to their offspring. Alleles is the scientific term for those traits or characteristics of an organism. Organism means a living thing. So traits would be things such as color, shapes, and sizes. Okay? So as you can imagine, if genes carry the alleles, then there are two alleles per gene because there is a mother trait and a father trait, right? So we need to put a little note here that there are two alleles per gene, which would be the mother, whatever the mother contributes, her trait, and the dad contributes his trait. So the mom allele and the dad allele per gene. And then alleles can be dominant. And notice that I wrote that in all capital letters. That's on purpose because a dominant trait is one that basically kind of takes over other traits. And then we can have dominant traits, dominant alleles, or recessive alleles. And I wrote that in small letters to remind us that it is kind of like the weaker of the two. It's only going to show up under certain circumstances. If there's a dominant trait with a recessive, the dominant wins. Okay? So dominant allele or recessive alleles. And so dominant, we said, are the ones that take over, or the scientific word is that they mask recessive traits or alleles. You can kind of make traits, you can say traits whenever you say alleles to remind yourself that's what it means. And then recessive traits or alleles only appear when when they are paired with another recessive allele. So if there's a dominant allele in the pair, the dominant wins. But if there are two recessive alleles or traits, that's when the recessive will be able to appear. Okay? So we'll get more into that as we go. So then there are two words, genotype and phenotype, that sound very much alike. So when we talk about dominant and recessive and the combination of alleles, that combination is called the genotype. Genotype is the combination of alleles from the parents. Now, alleles are typically written as letter combinations, and you can use any letter. It doesn't really matter what letter you use. So for this example, I'm going to show you what I mean by a combination of alleles. So we can have two possible genotypes or combinations. We can have homozygous combination or a heterozygous combination. And this is a good time where if you have colors, colored pens or highlighters or something like that, it might help. So homozygous, homo means same, hetero means different, and zygous means where something came from or originated from. So zygous means comes from. Okay? So homozygous means they come from the same, and heterozygous means they come from different alleles. So this is what that would mean. If I had both mother and father gave two dominant traits, then that would be represented by two capital letters. Or if both mother and father gave two recessive traits, gave each a recessive trait, I would have two small letters. So they would come from the same type of allele, right? Both are the same. Heterozygous is when you have an allele that has both a dominant and a recessive combination. And if that happens, then the trait that will show up here will be the dominant trait. The recessive trait can only show up when it is paired with another recessive trait. So recessive only comes when it's homozygous recessive. This is homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, heterozygous, right? Different combination. So genotype means what is the combination of alleles. And so we can have, if we have a genotype of two dominants, then we call that homozygous dominant genotype. So if you're asked for genotype, they're asking you for the combination, okay? These would be called also homozygous, but they're not dominant. They're both small, so these are homozygous recessive. That's a homozygous recessive genotype. And then we can have a heterozygous genotype. So homozygous, you have to say, is it homozygous dominant, two capital letters, or homozygous recessive, because it could be either one. All right, and then the last word for this page is phenotype. So from this genotype, from this combination, phenotype, and really let's pay attention to that letter P, because that kind of gives us a hint as to the meaning. Phenotype is the physical appearance resulting from the genotype. So the genotype combination produces a certain appearance. So remember, all those P's. Physical appearance is what phenotype means. So for example, if I had traits where a capital G equals green, and then the recessive, like if you were talking about eye color or something like that, you always use basically the same letter. You just use a capital or a lowercase to show which is recessive or dominant. So if the capital G means something is going to be green, and a lowercase g could mean something is going to be orange. So maybe I'm looking at a flower or a leaf or something. Okay? So let's say that this is an example of phenotype. So the genotype possibilities here are homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous combination, right? So if the genotype is two capital G's, then that produces the phenotype, two dominant greens equal green. Okay? Two recessive oranges are going to equal orange. I have a dominant green and a recessive orange. Dominant wins. So the heterozygous will also be green. Okay? So genotype is the combination. Phenotype is how that turns out looking. That's the appearance that is produced. Right? So if it's a leaf, then I can say this is how it's going to turn out looking from that combination. Okay? So we're going to do some practice on this, but I want you to get those notes that you can refer back to. And then I will have another video ready for you for page 15.